don't like using that word, but that's what they are.
Ah, now he comes.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to our first third Thursday lunchtime lecture of 2022. The last 2 years have been very sketchy because of COVID. We've had some Zoom events, some live events, but this year we have a full slate from February through November. Very exciting to get back on track with that. This is the beginning of our second decade of third Thursday lunchtime lectures. Our first one was January of 2012, and so here we are in 2022, and we've got a great start to this decade. Today we have Andrea Luchini, who is the horticulturist and greenhouse manager over at Hildene, the Robert Todd Lincoln Estate in Manchester. And before that, she was with the North Carolina Arboretum in Asheville, North Carolina. And before that, she was growing up in South Burlington, Vermont, and in just north of there in Burlington, Vermont, she went to UVM. She got her bachelor's degree in anthropology and environmental studies and her master's degree in horticulture. And so, you know, it's such a warm day outside. Thank you for all being here. Yeah, it's incredible, and it makes us think about spring and green things. So,
that's right.
Andrea, take it away.
I was actually hoping for a stormy day so we could see all these beautiful pictures of flowers, but this will work, right? Thank you very much. It's actually Andrea Luchini, like zucchini.
Oh, sorry.
It's fine.
And you told me that too, and I still messed it
did.
up.
It's fine. Just like the connection to zucchini, even though I don't grow the vegetables. But thank you again all for joining us, me here. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I am not the historian at Hildene at all, but I've tried to throw in a little extra history, seeing as we're at the Historical Society here. But I'll talk a little bit about the history of the gardens and then move into Hildene's current mission and how the gardens meet that mission and the things we are doing today. So it'll be informal. I sometimes can talk too long about things, you know, when you're talking about your job. You can go on forever, but I'll try to keep my eye on the time, and we'll have some questions at the end if you have any. That'll be fine. And I know a lot of you have visited Hildene, and a lot of you are members here today, so thank you very much for that. And volunteers, we have Susan here, who's one of my trusty volunteers, and we couldn't do it without all of you. So you all probably know the history better than I do, actually, of the estate, but I got this spiel from our archivist and stuff, so bear with me through this part. But as you probably know, Robert Lincoln was the only child of President Abraham Lincoln to survive to adulthood. He first came to Vermont when he and his mother vacationed here, and their younger brother Tad came as well, and they stayed at the Equinox in 1864. They loved it so much, and they made a reservation to bring the president back the next summer. So they were going to come in 1865 and give him a little break from the Civil War. And unfortunately, as we know, he was assassinated before he was able to make the trip here. Then Robert on his own became a successful lawyer with an office in Chicago. He took on a law partner named Edward Isham, who happened to have a home here. In the estate in Manchester Village, which is now, it was Ormsby Hill, as you probably know. So Robert visited Isham's home in Manchester and fell back in love with Vermont and ended up buying property here himself. He pieced together the property. Just a little more about Robert, you probably already know. He served as Secretary of War to 2 presidents. And under President Harrison, represented the United States as minister to the Court of St. James's in England. He later became the special counsel to the Pullman Company and ultimately its president when the founder George Pullman died. And under Robert Lincoln's leadership, the Pullman Company grew to be the largest manufacturing company in the world. For more of that history, you have to come to Hildene here, the professionals. So, Robert ultimately, as I said, purchased about 400 acres of land next to his partners in Ormsby Hill. He pieced together the property. It's hard to see on this map, but I just love that this is the original property map. of the estate. This was the first draft by the landscape architect, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So he built Hildene to enjoy with his family, which included his wife, who's the one on the steps there. Their daughter Jessie is the one on the landing there with the colorful dress, and their grandchildren, who included Peggy Beckwith.
Oh, yeah.
And she is the grandchild so 3 generations of Lincolns lived at Hildene over a span of 70 years. And Peggy Beckwith ultimately inherited the estate and lived there for most of her adult life. There she is in one of her many vehicles. She was an interesting character, and again, to learn more about her, you have to go to Hildene and hear about it. But we're going to talk more about the gardens and property side of things. So as I mentioned, there was a landscape architect for the property. His name was Frederick Todd. He trained, when he finished school, he did a couple of years of training at Olmsted. I'm blanking on that name. He worked at the Olmsted firm. So it was just after Frederick Law Olmsted retired from the firm, so he worked with Olmsted's sons at the Olmsted firm. So it was he still learned that philosophy, the Olmstedian philosophy of landscape design. A few things that I learned about him that I really like, because I feel like it's still how we manage the estate today. He was known, this is Todd, was known for designing with nature herself as partner, and was concerned with the wise use of natural resources, which are things that I'm also very concerned about today. So it's really nice that the Lincolns started, their property and estate with that same point of view. This is just an example of, this is the front lawn as you look out from the house across the front lawn. This is a historic photo of it, and it's sort of the same sweeping view that Olmsted might have done. So this is a little blow up of the section. I don't know if you can see it, but there's scribbling through here and some notes. This is where Robert Lincoln made notes for the landscape architect on how he wanted the property to look. And right here they've scribbled out a formal garden that's on that west side of the house. So if you've been there and you know that there's those terraced hills down the side, Todd, the landscape architect, had envisioned a formal garden down those terraced hillsides. But Mary Lincoln is the one that wanted the garden at the back of the house where it is today. I think that this took extra work, thinking about using nature herself as partner. If you've been to Hildene, on the left side over here, it's quite ledgy, and then there's the cliff below, so the ledge just wouldn't naturally stop where they stop now. So it's very likely this area had to be blasted out and create this beautiful flat space for a garden. So it may have taken extra work than putting it on those terraces that they were already having to build. But I like it there better. I'm very glad that in that instance, they didn't work with nature quite as much and put the garden at the back. So we believe that Jessie designed the garden as a gift to her mother. They spent, a lot of time in England, and I'm sure traveled abroad from there to France and things. So this is, we like to call it the Vermont version of a parterre garden. So this is privet that outlines the beds, not boxwood, but this is privet here. And it creates the leading in a stained glass window, and then the flowers make up the color of the stained glass window. And especially as you view it from where this picture was taken, which is Mary's second floor sitting room. If you look back at the house, that center window there, those 3 center windows actually are Mary's sitting room. So Jessie designed it so Mary could look out the window and see this beautiful garden. So you can see I think it was the great choice for that. So here's a design we actually found in the archives at some point, and you can see it is like the overall structure of the garden. When I started to look at it, I realized there is not privet hedge on this, any kind of hedging on this drawing, and with the spacing and the current spacing of the garden today, I don't think all of this would have fit, so I'm not sure what iteration of the garden this is. We don't know. We only have the fuzzy black and white photos, like I showed you, and I have a few more of, so we can't really tell what was in the garden very well. But this at least gives us a sense of the you know, what her design aesthetic was and what she was looking for. So she had some plantings in the middle here, mostly ornamental grasses and things like that, where we just have turf. Again, it's enough to take care of as it is, without doing that, but that would be quite beautiful as well. And then this line here, so there are some boxes around the outside, and some of these say herbs. Over here it says peonies. And then some of the big blocks are phlox, hollyhock, roses. And then these squares here, the numbered squares, are all perennial flowers. And there's a numbered plant list that went along with it. It took me forever to try to decipher that handwriting. I needed a little help. But they're common things, you know, that you would have expected that they grew in the time. Daisies and asters, anemones, campanulas, all those kind of garden plants that would have been popular then. Dahlias are big. Every corner, number one is dahlias, and every corner has a chunk of dahlias, so we know that they loved those. So again, who knows exactly if this is what went into the garden, but it's at least, you know, a nice visual for us to see what they were thinking about for their garden. And it certainly looks similar to what you can see. The centers there are planted with grasses and things like that, or big tall ornamental grasses and things. So quite beautiful, and if you'll notice that oak tree there, it's still there today. It is unfortunately almost gone. We lost the back side last year, and we lost another chunk this fall. So there isn't much left to the trunk of the tree. It's still holding strong. Every storm I go up there and look at it, but it's still there for right now. So as you probably know, Robert came up with the name for Hildene, for the obvious hill part of the word, is, you know, his house is up on a hill. And then Dean is an Old English word that means valley with a stream. We have a little more than a stream with the Battenkill River, but the property does include 80 acres of wetland along the Battenkill, and this is about 60 acres of pasture land above. So Hill and Dean became Hildene. So the story I was always told when I first started was that Peggy Beckwith, the last Lincoln to live there, didn't garden like her mother and grandmother. This is a picture of Jesse Lincoln out in the garden with some twine, and we believe that little child there is Peggy, looking at some ants or something in the brick, which is something I would do too, so I can relate to Peggy for sure. So that's what I was always told, and we called it the naturalized approach to gardening. I think it's more true that it's just as she got older, and then that time period before it became the Friends of Hildene, that the garden became overgrown. I actually don't know when this picture was taken, but if you're gardeners, you know how quickly a garden can become overgrown. And as I mentioned, the hedge around each bed is privet, which is normally a 6-7 foot shrub. So if it's not cared for, we shear it every week to keep it looking as it does now. So if there were, there was probably 5 years before the garden, from the time Peggy passed until the garden was gotten back into, and I don't know previous to that, how long it had been left. So it was a mess. The privet hedge was its full size of 6 or 7 feet. I talked to a woman, Camilla, I forget her last name, Fonz, who was the first gardener there, and she was able to get in past that privet hedge and told me what they found were enormous clumps of peonies. She described them as being this big, the clumps of peonies in there. And you can see a whole assortment of different colors of peonies that were left in the garden. Pretty much everything else was weed. I think that there were some daylilies and some iris, but it was mostly the peonies. We have at least, I'm really bad with numbers, but so I forget all the time, but I think it's about 25 different varieties of peonies that we inherited with the estate. Susan can help me with all this stuff because she talks about it all the time. Correct me if I get it wrong, Susan.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's what they found. So those peonies are still here, and I do have, so we saw on that drawing, I kind of forgot to point out on that drawing of Jessie, but some of those strips there were peonies as well. So we know that she wanted peonies. We have a letter from 1905 saying that peonies had arrived at the Manchester Depot, the train station in Manchester, from Paris, France, for the Lincolns at Hildene. So we know they ordered peonies in 1905 from France, and we know we inherited peonies in 1976 with the estate. So, and you know how long peonies can be around. So we just only can assume that some of those are from those pieces of root from France in 1905. So just to go through some pretty flower pictures on a winter day, we have an assortment, from this is a peony, a single type flowered peony, in a couple different colors. That was pink. This is a more blush, light pink. This is anemone type peony, I think is what crown type, anemone type. There's lots of different peony types. Like this one as well. Another one. And then we have semi-doubles, which means it's almost fully double, but you can see some of the little reproductive parts in there. So that makes it a semi-double. And this one is another. And then the full double, like this Festival Maxima. So we consider, there's Jessie in the garden tending some peonies. Ginormous peonies, right? Really big ones. So we consider the peonies and the privet hedge our legacy from Jessie and Mary Lincoln. But as you can imagine, and as I said, the garden needed a complete renovation, which allowed us to create our own layer, if you will, layer of history on the garden. So we're keeping our roots in the past by maintaining the peonies and the privet hedge, but we are adding new roots for the future. So Hildene's current mission, you've probably heard about, is values into action, and that's key to us moving forward. Our core values that we've identified are integrity, perseverance, and civic responsibility. The actions we take to uphold these values include historic preservation with the house, civil civic discourse, especially with the Pullman car, sustainability, and land conservation. So those are the areas that I am most focused on, the sustainability and land conservation in our gardens, grounds, and woodlands. So as part of that, we have shifted our land management priorities. Sort of as I came on board, they were already shifting land management priorities to focus on overall habitat health, and with a special focus on pollinators that has evolved in my time there. I'm sure you all know about pollinator decline that's happening, and I'll talk plenty about it. That's one of the things I can talk a lot about, but I will talk a little bit about that. But some of the main factors in that is habitat loss and pesticide use. It's problems, in a lot of areas, and we are really focused on having healthy land to avoid that. So I'll just talk a little bit about it. So we know honeybees, the severe decline in honeybees, and how much we depend on them for pollinating our food crops, which include almonds, apples, melons, broccoli, just to name a few. I don't know if you've seen those pictures. There's sometimes pictures of what a grocery store would look like without animal pollination, and it's pretty bare. So those important foods that keep us healthy, we need to keep the pollinators healthy for that. This is an interesting map that I found from National Geographic. I think it's from 2015, but it shows how honeybees are moved around the country. So that's why honeybees are so important for pollination, is because they can live in managed hives and move from location to location instead of relying on the native bees of an area. But I'll talk about that in a minute. So that's what they do. So there are people, commercial beekeepers, who just move their hives all around the country to pollinate crops. The areas, I had to write this down because that's a little fuzzy. The darkest colored states have the most crop acreage pollinated by bees. And then the states with the dotted patterns, like these states here, all those states have bee colony loss over 50%. So those are the major problem areas, are those dotted states and the high reliance on honeybee population. And I'll show you another map in a few minutes. And if you remember where, this falls in the country, when we look at that other map. So honeybees are super important for many reasons because they can be managed and brought to location. In a lot of cases, they're the workhorses of pollination. They're really good at it, and they do it really efficiently. But native bees can actually be much more efficient, especially at those crops they co-evolved with. So the native bees in an area where, say, blueberries are native to, are actually more efficient at pollinating a blueberry flower than a honeybee is. The blueberry flower, if you see, it's a really teeny little flower, so it does a lot better when there's a little teeny bee that can get into that little flower and pollinate it. And there's different methods of pollination, and I'll try not to get into this too much. But so bumblebees do something called buzz pollination, and so some flowers like tomatoes, and I think blueberries as well, respond better to buzz pollination. And it has to do with the frequency of that bumblebee buzz actually makes the pollen release from the flower and drop to a different flower. So it's not as much that the bumblebee's getting it on its body and physically moving it, it's the buzzing of the bumblebee which causes the pollen to release and go to another flower. So nature is amazing, and it has already figured this out, and we're trying to impose our honeybees on it that are not native to the States. They're from Asia or somewhere. And it's great, they have been wonderful, and I'm not saying we should get rid of honeybees, but we need to rely more on native bees to do a lot of this pollination. And I actually read something recently that they actually think a lot of the pollination that gets attributed to honeybees is actually done by native bees that nobody was paying attention to. So, if there's an apple orchard out there and somebody brings in bee pollinators, they're not paying attention to the pollinators that are really already there and doing the pollination, and they're just saying, hey, these bees we brought in did all this great pollination. But they haven't really studied who's actually doing that pollination. Just things to think about. So native bees are super cool, and I get really distracted looking at them. This is a little video. And I take a lot of videos and pictures. And once you start looking at them, it's really cool. So if you can tell, those are two different colored bees. And I started noticing that bee is really much brighter in color. And even I don't know if hair is the right word, I'm not an entomologist, but we'll call it the hair on the bee was kind of looked like it had bedhead. It wasn't like as smooth and nice as a bumblebee. So I worked with our youth education director, who's very passionate about bees, especially, and we got it identified as a different bee for us, one we hadn't seen before. It's called a perplexing bumblebee. So this one here is a common bumblebee, and that messy bedhead one is perplexing bumblebee. Bombus perplexus. Its name. So it's really fascinating to just spend some time and start observing your bees. See, I get myself all off track. Oh, and just a few numbers that I have to refer to here. In Vermont, we actually have 275 different native bees.
Oh my goodness.
That includes like several different species of bumblebee. Like here, this is just two. And then it includes all sorts of little native bees, squash bees, sweat bees. There's a ton of different sweat bees, and I'll try to show you some different pictures as we go through.
What's the number again?
275. That's a lot. And over in New York State, where they have bigger territory and a little warmer, they have 430 different species of native bees. So yeah, it's just something to think about and be a little more aware of beyond the honeybee. So here's that other map I was talking about. This is a study done by UVM, the Gund Institute at UVM, which looks at economic issues in correlation with environmental issues. So this map shows wild bee abundance across the United States. Blue is high abundance, yellow is low abundance. And if you look at where those yellow parts are, those are the same places where the bee colony loss is at 50% or more. And if you think about the country and what happens in those areas of the country, that's where industrial agriculture is happening. Out in California, you know, with the almonds and whatever, the center of the country, the grain belt through the center of the country, and a lot of citrus and those types of things in Florida. So that is habitat loss and pesticide use is what's causing these problems. And something we need to figure out a little bit better. Okay, let's go to happy things again. So included in our focus on pollinators are butterflies in general, and of course monarch butterflies in particular. This isn't happy, I thought it was happy, it's a pretty picture. But monarchs are actually a candidate now for the endangered species list. They were given they're a candidate, but they weren't given high priority status. I don't know the politics behind that, but anyway, there's a significant loss. The population has dropped 80 or 90% in my lifetime. 40 years or so. We have lost that many of the monarch butterflies. Monarchs are, of course, an iconic butterfly. We all know what they look like. And they have the most amazing migration pattern of any butterfly and almost any insect. So I'll talk a little bit about that because I got to go to Mexico and see that. So most butterflies overwinter as eggs, pupae, or larvae under logs and leaf litter, or even in the ground. Sometimes they burrow into the ground. You can see there's one type, I can't remember the name of it, but in early spring you'll see butterflies sometimes emerging from a big leaf pile because that adult spent the winter hunkering down in those leaves and comes out when it's warm. Monarchs actually overwinter as adults, but they have to fly to Mexico. So all, I don't have this map here, but all monarchs that are east of the Rocky Mountains fly to an area in Mexico. All monarchs west go out to California. I have a map in a minute. So all the monarchs east of the Rockies go to this area of Mexico. It's about 3,000 miles for them to get there, from this area and Canada going there, it's 3,000 miles. They don't know how they find it. They go to literally the same locations in Mexico. And it is 3 to 4 generations removed from the butterfly that left Mexico in the spring. So how that, great-great-grandchild, if you will, knows to go back to this exact same spot in Mexico, it still hasn't been figured out. It's a really mineral-rich area in Mexico, so they, maybe there's some magnetic draw for them, but really, and they didn't even, by they I mean, white scientists, didn't find where the butterflies went until the mid-70s. Of course, the native people always knew, and it's a big part of their culture. They actually arrive in Mexico right around the Day of the Dead, so it's hugely incorporated into their culture. The butterflies are. But this is amazingly beautiful. This is a picture I took from in Mexico in this area. I forget the name of the mountains, but it's it's the same area where a lot of avocados come from and that sort of thing. So again, this is the map I was talking about. It's just all the butterflies east come here, and then in west they go over to California. I mean, that's a long way. It's way down, near Mexico City that they fly to. And so this is how they stay warm. This is a photo of a cluster that I took just with my iPhone through binoculars there in Mexico. So they're literally, like when you go to the place in Mexico, they have some preserves that the government has worked with, World Wildlife Fund, and are working to create these areas of preserve for the butterflies, which, just to get on my soapbox again, is very difficult because, again, I said that's a mineral-rich area of Mexico. There used to be a lot of mining there, and of course they were American mines, and especially this one town I went to, the American Mining Company, there was a big accident, and the American Mining Company pulled out and left the village destitute because they had no other way to earn money. It's a very remote mountainous land. So logging has been a major economic they need it. They need money to survive. We can't judge them for that, but we could help them find other economic avenues. And so the same with avocados. They clear a lot of land to grow the avocados. So they make money off the logging, and then they grow avocados in these forests where the butterflies were going. And it's literally the same place, so it is a well-worn path to go to the trees where the butterflies are. They go on Oyamel fir is the name of the fir tree that they hang on like this. And again, there's a ton of science that's still happening to figure out how they do this, why they do this. It's amazing. Okay, I gotta move on. But anyway, when it warms up, they open up and can fly around. So when it's cold, they stay like that and keep each other warm in those massive clumps. And this is just a fun little.
Oh my goodness.
Again, this was just with my iPhone one day when the sun came out, and it was just truly amazing. My mom came with me, and she was amazed. Okay, so also moving on to bobolinks are another piece. So birds in general are also affected by habitat loss and pesticide use, and bobolinks are another iconic bird species that we all recognize, especially here in Vermont. They nest in grasslands as opposed to trees where a lot of songbirds nest. Bobolinks nest in grasslands, which in Vermont really just means an unmown hayfield, which is hard to do because again we need to make the money, we need to hay. So again, there's a balance there. We have a section of grass, I'll talk about in a minute, a section of hayfield that we mow only at certain times of year because we have nesting pairs of bobolinks that come every year. Bobolinks fly 12,500 miles round trip for their migration. So they spend the winters in Uruguay, that area of South America, and they fly there. So that's 12,500 miles round trip. And it's the same birds keep coming back to Hildene's fields. It's the same bobolinks, that come back and lay their, make their nests in the ground and lay their eggs. It's amazing. We have a group of birders that come on Saturdays once a month and sometimes twice a month, and they record the bobolinks and how many numbers we have and stuff. So that was a lot to say. We now consider the 412-acre property we currently have as a pollinator and songbird sanctuary. So that means any decisions that we make regarding land use in general and horticultural, agricultural, forestry-related practices all have pollinators and songbirds in the forefront of our mind as we make those decisions and determine how we manage the land. So that means we have things like our butterfly garden. That's there. It's dedicated specifically to butterflies, and we have nectar plants for butterflies like these zinnias and lots of other pretty flowers. Echinacea is another one. So just to point out, this is the monarch minnow butterfly. This is a viceroy butterfly. See how close it looks to the monarch? But it's actually a viceroy. I saw that in the garden. I think that was this summer, maybe last, in our butterfly garden. And then we have host plants for certain butterflies as well. So a lot of butterflies, the caterpillars, can only eat certain plants. One example, I think this is the eastern swallowtail. Yeah, things in the parsley family are host plants for eastern swallowtail butterflies. So that's all those things with that kind of flower, Queen Anne's lace, dill, parsley, everything along those lines are host plants for eastern swallowtail. And then, as you probably know, monarchs can only eat milkweed plant families. There's a lot of different plants in the milkweed family, but that is the only family that monarch caterpillars, like right there, can eat to survive. So monarchs have to have milkweed. So that's one of the things that's happening with industrial agriculture and the advent of the genetically modified crops. They were genetically modified so that Roundup could be sprayed over them and not kill the crops and only kill the weeds. And one of the major weeds on the side of farm fields out in the Midwest is milkweed. So when they do that and spray, they're getting a much more efficient weed kill for the farmers And again, we have to understand that they're trying to make their living too, but they've killed off a ton of the milkweed. So there's a desert in the middle of the country pretty much for these monarchs that need it to make their trip to Mexico. They have to, and they come up from Mexico. It's not like the butterfly from here in the fall does fly all the way to Mexico, but the one in the spring only flies up to Texas, lays its eggs, and then dies. And so then that one has to, they're much shorter generations. Somehow, again, monarchs are amazing. Somehow the fall generation of the monarch butterfly can live much longer, 6 months or so. But the summer generations only live about a month. So they have to live, they fly someplace and lay their eggs. And if there's that whole area of the central part of the country where there's no milkweed for them to lay their eggs, we lose, the life cycle stops there. Anyway, I keep going on this. I love butterflies, in case you didn't know, and monarchs. Anyway, in the butterfly garden, we also have plants that conveniently support bees, like a lot of the same plants that butterflies do. So things like aster, perennials, we do a lot of perennials, but then we throw in some annuals as well, like tithonia, which is Mexican sunflower. It's a great annual, it gets really big, has these great orangey flowers, similar to a zinnia flower, but just with the center there and everything. All the pollinators, bees and butterflies, love the tithonia. So it's important to have those flowers around, as I've been talking, for vegetable plants. So right next to our butterfly garden is a vegetable garden. It has recently been renamed Hildene's Giving Garden, and this is run by volunteers and always has been. And all the food from this garden goes to the Manchester Food Cupboard. They do, thousands of pounds. It's amazing to me how much they get out of this little garden, so that there's fresh food for people in need in our community. And we have tons of flowers in there too to support the pollinators and other beneficial insects that I'll probably talk about in a minute if I have time. So here's the crew of volunteers who come once a week and plant and harvest and weed in that garden. They're pretty amazing. They come absolutely every week, every Wednesday morning. They are there like clockwork. We also have cutting gardens in that area that another group of volunteers use to make floral arrangements in the house. And conveniently, a lot of those flowers are appreciated by bees as well. So it all comes full circle. We also have other dedicated pollinator gardens. This one, I need a better attractive name for it, but it is just our native perennial pollinator garden. So all of these are all perennials. They are all native to this general region. Like, maybe they're not native to Dorset, Vermont, but they're native to the Northeast area. And so this specifically supports native pollinators and is an example for what people can do at home. This is adjacent to, this garden is, if you've been to Hildene, it's behind the tent. So it's adjacent to the meadow that's back there. And we already had a really great meadow that was full of milkweed and goldenrod, which are really great pollinator plants. So even milkweed, the monarchs need it, but bees also, like the flowers, get nectar and pollen from the flowers. And goldenrod, since it's so late and so prolific, it's a really important one for bees, especially honeybees on the goldenrod. But I wanted more diversity. So to have a diversity of bees, you need a diversity of flowers, flower types, flower bloom time, flower color, all those things are required. So I put that garden adjacent to the meadow just to encourage diversity and abundance is what you need for them. And some more pretty pictures. This is probably a video too, because this is really fun. So this is called penstemon or beard tongue, and I just love watching the bees flip, or the big bumblebees have to flip themselves over to get in there and then turn around and come back out. The smaller bees don't have to do that for those flowers, but the big bumblebees have to kind of twist and force their way in. This is called Monarda punctata. So I don't know what this kind of bee is, but it's a different native bee. You can see it looks a little bit different. I gotta get that identified. Probably in the sweat bee family. Again, this is butterfly milkweed, so monarchs can and do lay their eggs and the caterpillars eat this, and bees like the flowers. This is Agastache or Anise hyssop. It's a great one for bees. They just just are all over this flower. And this one's a really great one. It's called Mountain Mint. It's just a really cool one I hadn't been aware of before this, and I just recommend this for everybody. It's really attractive to a bunch, I don't know if this is a video, a bunch of different bees. So bumblebees, honeybees, there'll be wasps on there, which are actually good. I know they sting, but wasps are carnivores. So they're considered one of the beneficial insects. So wasps help us take care of other pest bugs. There are some teeny wasps I actually buy in for the greenhouse. They're called parasitic wasps. And what they do is they lay their eggs in aphids, and then the egg hatches and the little larvae of the wasp eat the inside of the aphid out, and then mature and become an adult wasp outside. So we can't totally rule out wasps. I know yellow jackets are horrible, and those bald-faced wasps aren't fun, but I react very strongly to the stings. But if we can learn to live with them, they're really important and part of the ecosystem and help us. And so we don't have to spray chemicals if we have these beneficial insects out there taking care of things for us. Oh yeah, I get, having iPhones right in your pocket is really handy. And sometimes it's easier than a picture to really grasp.
Real thing.
So again, this is a great fall flower. This is Helen's flower, sneezeweed, helenium. And this is a megachilid. This bee, it's in the megachilid family, and it's the leafcutter family. And if you can see that yellow underside, so instead of sacs like bumblebees and honeybees have on their legs, it collects all the pollen on the underside of their belly. And I just think they're cute. The little butt kind of pokes up in the air a little bit. Just like them. All right, I gotta keep moving on here. So I said the formal garden was renovated in the early 80s and had been designed to look like a stained glass window. We didn't know much more than that, so what's happened is that it got replanted in sort of the color blocking pattern. So there's pink, white, blue, and yellow beds. And so among that, I'm not trying to change, we still can have our beautiful ornamental flowers. But I've tried to throw in some natives, and I've tried to encourage even the ornamental non-native flowers that still support bees. So the ornamental poppies are great, and it's really cool because the pollen is black, and it gets in the honeybee as black pollen. So you can see that. This is a native, but it's beautiful, and the bees love it. This is Culver's root, or Verona castrum. And again, this is this is one of the sweat bees. See, it's a green metallic bee, so those are really cool to observe. They're a little bit smaller. Sweat bees tend to be, and sweat bees are those ones that kind of give you a little sting when you're sweaty. They really are going after your sweat. They need minerals too, bees need minerals to survive, and they give you a little sting, but generally, I rarely get stung by bees. I'm out in the garden all the time. The only time I get stung by a bee is if I grab a flower without looking and it's on it, or something like that. Like maybe a sting a year is all I get. So it's possible to work with them. This is a perennial perennial chrysanthemum. This is a perennial bachelor button. This is echinops. Globe thistle is the common name. Daisies are great. So this is actually a fly. Flies are gross too, but they're beneficial as well. I'll talk about them in a minute. I think this is another video. Oh, here's the video. This is bugbane. You see this in gardens a lot, and the bees will love it. This is that tall rudbeckia, the really tall rudbeckia. This is another plant in the bachelor button family. It's a knapweed, or Armenian basket flower is the name of that. It's a really cool one. And even our peonies can support pollinators. Those single flower peonies, like I pointed out before, all of that is chock full of pollen for bees, and they love them. They're full of all different kinds of bees when they're in full bloom. So we try to incorporate them. And we still have the beautiful double peonies, but these single ones with all that pollen are fantastic. And there's another of the green metallic sweat bees. Other plants that are great are catmint or nepeta. We have a ton of that behind the house. Bumblebees especially love that one. And then the fall flower, sedum autumn joy, bees and butterflies all over that. Even roses can be great. This is one that you have to be careful of because a lot of people spray their roses with different things. Roses do get a lot of pests, but those, especially those insecticides, if you're spraying them for your pest bugs, you're also going to kill, it's collateral damage. You're going to kill all the good bugs. So even some of those insecticides, the ones that linger, which are technically the best ones for an insecticide, right? They get into the flower system, the plant system, and so they give it protection for a longer period of time. But that means if a bee is visiting that flower that you sprayed with that pesticide and it's still in the system, it's going to get it through the pollen and then it's going to harm that bee. So we can't be spraying our roses, unfortunately. We hand pick pests off and we accept a little bit more damage, which I'll talk about in a minute. So messy gardening is really key to this as well. So beyond having nectar and pollen for pollinators, you need to give them habitat. So I mentioned those butterflies that nest under piles of leaves. Other bees nest in hollow stems. That's where they create their nests. A lot of bees are solitary. So bumblebees and honeybees go in colonies, like that's how we can have the hives and things. But a lot of bees are solitary nesters. So just one queen will go lay individual eggs in an area, in a nest site. This is just more, I'm gonna move on. Having weeds, these are just considered weeds, but they support pollinators as well, like dandelions. We don't mow our lawns when the dandelions are in bloom. It's really hard for the ground staff because they take a lot of pride in how their lawns look, how our lawns look. But it's really important, especially in early spring. There's not a lot out there for bees, especially honeybees, for them to feed on. And so dandelions are a great source of that. Plus, I like the bright, cheerful yellow color in the spring. We created a bee lawn. Don't really need to talk about that now. I'm running out of time, but crocus are a great, again, they're not native, but they do support bees because they bloom so early and have pollen and nectar for the bees. Another Andrea video. Get very excited about them. So this is where I said we have to accept more damage. So this here is Japanese beetle damage, but those megachilid bees I mentioned, the leafcutter bees, they also do that, especially to roses. They cut a little piece of leaf and they fly it back. They're ones that nest in a hollow stem. So they will cut a little piece of leaf, put it in the stem, lay an egg on it, and then go fly out, cut another little piece of leaf, lay it over that egg they just laid, lay another egg on it, and go back and forth. So they're making these little cuts in the leaves and they're using it. That's why the leaves there, for them to use, to make their nest. And those beneficial insects, again, flies, good things. I don't know if you can see it, but there's white dots on the back of those Japanese beetle heads. Those are actually the egg of a particular fly, a tachinid fly, I believe. And again, grossness, but that fly lays the egg. The egg hatches and goes into the Japanese beetle body and eats it, and then emerges as an adult fly. So again, it's natural pest control. So we hand pick our Japanese beetles off, but we leave a lot of the ones if we see a white dot on it to encourage that fly population. And you'll find hollowed out Japanese beetles. It's gross, I know. And then accepting that there's going to be some pests there. This is a red aphid that gets all over. This is that perennial sunflower, Helianthus. It just goes, it's there for a little while in the summer and then it's just gone. It's not a big deal. Like, it doesn't affect this particular plant can handle the aphids, and I don't do anything about it, and then it's gone and it blooms and it's beautiful. No big deal. We don't have to go out there spraying insecticides just to get rid of those things. Okay, some more grossness. This is a tachinid fly. I don't know that it's the same one that lays on the Japanese beetle, but that's an example of a tachinid fly. It's actually really good. It's helping you out in your garden. This is an ambush bug, so it's right there. They kind of camouflage in flowers, and what it does, it lies in wait for another bug. It usually gets bees. I've seen it get a yellow jacket. See, it's controlling wasps as well. And it has these really big, strong forearms, and it'll grab, I have yet to see it, I watch a long time, I watch these bugs, and I have yet to see it, but it will grab a bee with its really strong forearms, and then it injects something into the bee, liquefies the inside, paralyzes it, liquefies the insides, sucks it out, and that's how it eats. It's gross, I know, but it's nature's, you know, it's taking care of it for us. These are all over our garden, and we work a lot with UVM entomology. They visit a lot. They were doing a study on the other types of beneficial insects that come to pollinator gardens, and this is how I learned about these things. She hadn't seen some of these out in nature, if you will, because we've used pesticides so heavily. And we haven't used pesticides for a long enough time at Hildene in our gardens that we have all these cool bugs around. Because even if we're trying to spray other pesticides, again, there's collateral damage that affects the whole insect world. But we don't have that, and so we have these cool bugs. Messy forests I won't really get into, but messy is the key. This helps, this is habitat for birds, it helps build the soil. People have a hard time with this. They want their forests to be nice, neat little areas, but that's not nature, right? If you think about what nature does, we have to help encourage this kind of cycling. We do have a large invasive plant problem that we struggle with dealing with because there's no great answer to that, but we are trialing our dairy goats out in there and trying to get them to eat the invasives. They do sometimes like the natives better, but we're trying. There's ways to encourage what they eat. And you can see they were really liking that honeysuckle there. I think that's Juliet. She's quite an active goat. And then I don't really have time to talk about this, but I encourage you to come to Hildene and see the rest of the property, including the Dean, Hildene Farm in the Dean now. That lower area I told you about where there's 60 acres. It used to be, if you're, been here a long time, this is where the polo matches were and the craft shows and all that kind of thing. We have turned that back into agriculture, which is what the Lincolns used this land for. And so we have this great new farm where we house alpaca, sheep. So we have fiber animals, alpaca and sheep, and we make yarn and different fiber products. This is a heritage breed of cattle called Randall cattle that we have there. We just have them, we haven't used them for anything, but Randall can be oxen, beef cattle, and dairy cow. We don't milk them, but they are a multi-use breed. Pigs, we do have pigs occasionally, and we rotationally graze all of this. So all of these play a role. Alpaca don't really play a role. They're just cool and have fiber. But all the other animals play a role in a rotational grazing system. So if you have a tough area, pigs really beat it up. Other animals like the cows and the sheep, defecate around and are natural manure, so we don't have to buy in chemical fertilizers for our pasture. And their feet, work it into the ground as they rotationally graze around. So it's all part of a system, a really important system. This is just showing our bobolink area is out here where our bobolinks always nest. It's sort of on the back pasture. This was taken, I had to go up on a lift and fix something on the greenhouse. So this is the greenhouse. These are some production vegetable gardens. There's the new farm, and the bobolink area is out there. We call it the bobolink sanctuary just because that's where the bobolinks already were going to. We've put in, purposely put in more flowers down at the pasture so that, there's not a desert for pollinators anywhere. We do have an apiary. Do you have some honeybees? Compost, we compost, that's all part of the cycle again, so we're not buying in commercial fertilizers. These piles are just from the goat dairy. The bedding and manure from the goat dairy compost on their own. Well, we manage it, but they make a really nice compost that I use back up in the formal garden. It's very rich, it's very great. We now compost food scraps too from weddings. So we have this great compost facility to do hot composting, so they don't have to sort the food scraps. We can take meat and all of that because we get to a high enough temperature to break all that down and break down any bacteria and harmful things, weed seeds, all that. I don't know if you know, but we have a collaboration with Burton Academy, and they now have a classroom at Dean Farm where they take a variety of classes, and a bunch of classes come, even English and math and all that come, but there are specific classes there on farm and food systems, ecology, and things like that. And it's going to, I think there's an ethnobotany class, all sorts of great classes, and we hire a group of students in the summertime to work in the gardens. In my greenhouse, there's some students doing a class in the greenhouse, again in the garden. So we have two parts to the greenhouse. We have essentially a really nice cold frame where we grow in-ground vegetables, and this is the heated space of the greenhouse. I grow all my flower starts, we grow vegetable starts there, and a lot of that food goes to the BBA cafeteria. It goes to our caterers for our weddings and those events, and now we have an association with Grateful Hearts in the area. I don't know if you know them, but they glean food from farms. So we have some dedicated garden space now. It came up with the pandemic, and we weren't having events. We needed something to do with that food we were already starting to grow. So it went to Grateful Hearts, and my colleague Anne has a great association, and now Grateful Hearts get a lot of their produce from our gardens, which is really great. I manage the greenhouse with beneficial insects instead of pesticides. We sell some of those native pollinator plants to encourage people to have those gardens at home, and we sell pieces of the historic peonies. I was going to talk about the peonies. We don't know what most of them are, but we got a few identified and named as unique cultivars with the American Peony Society. One's called Hildene, and this is the flower of Hildene. Pretty unique flower there. The second is called Jesse Lincoln, after the designer of the garden. And this peony emerges really deep red in the springtime. It's really quite striking. And then this is the flower of the Jesse Lincoln. It's a semi-double. It still has some of that deep red through the petals. All right, I made it through. Sorry I got talking fast there. I told you I can get a lot stressed. Thank you all again for coming, and if you have any questions, I'll hang around afterwards, but please always feel free to contact me.
If there are any questions now, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any trouble wintering over your bees?
Yeah, we
I
do.
wondered if you could.
And I'm not the beekeeper, so I don't know. She's been working a lot on trying to figure that out. I think she's been successful so far this year. There's so much to figure out with it. Last year, I think it was last year or the year before, we had a really rich floral season up until a point, and she harvested a lot of honey because it was feeling like it was a great year, but then we had an early freeze, and so the bees weren't able to build back as much honey as they needed, so they didn't have enough reserves through the winter. It's just so many variables to figure out.
And there are mites and things.
The mites, yeah, she does treat for the mites, and there's just a lot of factors involved.
I used to be a beekeeper, and
Okay.
I ended up growing a lot of mint right in front of the hives.
Okay.
And I think it made a difference for the mites.
Okay, yeah, we just put the apiary down in the Dean, and I've been talking with our beekeeper, who's Dion Newton. She's our director of youth education, and also our beekeeper, and talking about getting some flowers put around there. But mint's a really great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions right now? Susan?
Where exactly are the recycling areas on the property?
Recycling?
Well, the composting, excuse me.
Composting. We have a small bin composting behind the giving garden. So we have that cutting and kitchen garden area, which is the gardens out behind the Welcome Center. And then behind that structure of the giving garden is small bin composting like you would have at home, so that's cold style composting. You can't put the meats and fats and things in that. So we have 4 bins hidden, they're kind of hidden back there because they're behind that structure. And then those piles were down at the Dean, but they were taken up pasture. So now they're back up at the goat dairy.
Okay.
So they're starting to manage their own composting of their manure and spreading it a lot more on the fields than they ever had. We got a manure spreader. And then that large bin system where we take the food scraps from catered events and all that sort of thing and mix it with my garden stuff and the animal manures. That's right down in the Dean, behind the greenhouse near the Dean Animal Farm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you gotta come out and take a walk.
I know.
I stick you in the formal garden so much.
It's a
Big walk, right?
It is a big walk. We're hoping this year, if you know anybody who wants a job, we struggled last year with getting enough staff to get our transportation back up and running. That's why we're still only open 5 days a week, because we don't have, we can't find the staff to staff us out fully. What we need to be open 7 days a week and to run transportation to get people down to the Dean and stuff. So we are trying. It's hard in this area and everywhere, really. Any other questions? If not, please feel free. My email is andrea@hildene.org. Please feel free to reach out anytime with any questions.
Andrea, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Erica has supplied us with good drink and sweets in the other room, and you can answer some more questions there perhaps. But I just had a few quick announcements. First of all, there's a book called Natural Beekeeping by Ross Conrad. I don't know if you know it.
It sounds familiar.
Ross is a nationally known figure in beekeeping. He lives up in Bristol, Vermont. No, Lincoln, Vermont, which is next to Bristol. And the only reason I mention him is he's recently co-written a book on the history of Vermont beekeeping, and he will be our guest speaker in November, on November 17th. So if you want more on bees, come on then. Now he co-wrote that book with somebody else who you might have heard of. His name is Bill Mayers, who's written a whole bunch of books on Vermont. His most recent book isn't the beekeeping book, which is a recent book, but is a book on the history of Vermont humor. And he will be here without Ross, and Ross will be without Bill, but Bill will be here on Thursday, April 21st to talk about that. Meanwhile, moving back in time, our next third Thursday lunchtime lecture will be Michael Lang, who will be talking about the many meanings of maple. Talking about maple production, of course, but who has made maple and for what use. And so that should be very exciting.
Very good.
Again, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. And if anybody came in late and didn't get a guest